and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome, and I'm happy you're here. If you don't know me, my name is Jaime Leigh and I'm a mixed media artist. Here on my channel I do art videos like drawing with a light box, time-lapse painting videos, and videos on art supplies and techniques. I also do a series of weird art videos where I talk about paranormal art, interesting tales from art history, and some art and true crime content. If any of that sounds interesting to you and you are an art nerd like me, I hope you'll stick around. You can hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified every time I post a new video. Today's video falls into the weird art category because today I am talking about a true crime tale that made shockwaves in the mid-1980s when it all happened. Today's story involves two now well-known artists, minimalist sculptor Carl Andre and his wife at the time of these events, Cuban artist Ana Mendieta. At the time all of this story took place, Carl was already a respected and established fixture in the art world and is mostly credited with starting the minimalist movement, and Ana was a no-holds-barred, hardworking newcomer whose star was on the rise. What actually happened in the early morning hours of Sunday, September 8, 1985 remains a topic of hot debate in both the art world and the regular world, even now, almost 40 years later. But one fact is indisputable. That morning, tiny Ana, who was deathly afraid of heights, plunged 34 stories, 269 feet in mere seconds, from the window of apartment 34E, the high-rise apartment that she stayed at with her husband Carl at 300 Mercer Street in New York City. What caused Ana to fall to her death on that fateful morning is a mystery with so many questions and not nearly enough answers. And the only person who can tell for sure what happened, Carl Andre, never talked publicly until a New Yorker article published in 2011 that I will discuss later in these videos. I used as my sources for these videos several articles that I will link below in the description box, plus one book I found particularly helpful called Naked by the Window: The Fatal Marriage of Carl Andre and Ana Mendieta, written by Robert Katz in 1990. This story will be broken up into two videos because there is a lot of information to cover, and I felt like trying to pack everything into one video would do the story a disservice. So today's video is part one, and we'll cover how Ana and Carl met, who Ana and Carl were as people and artists, and what their relationship was like. Part 2, which will be posted next week, will cover Ana's death, the trial, and the aftermath. So let's take a look at who Carl and Ana were, how they met, their relationship, and their careers to get a better understanding of what led to the events of September 8th, 1985. On the night of November 12, 1979, Carl Andre and Ana Mendieta met for the first time. It was not a meet cute or love at first sight. It was simply a chance encounter of two artists being involved in the same event at the same time. Several days before, on November 6th, Ana had shown her work at an art opening at the AIR Gallery, a non-profit women's cooperative gallery started by 20 founding women in 1972. AIR stood for Artists in Residence. After Ana's successful opening, the gallery set up a Monday night panel discussion to draw attention to the gallery and to Ana's work. It was on the topic of male artist views on female artists. Carl Andre was one of the panelists, since he was pretty much guaranteed to draw a good-sized crowd, being a New York art scene fixture, and he was also generally very open to being involved in events related to art in the city. The panel discussion had a surprisingly large audience, but ended up on a somewhat embarrassing note for poor Ana. The audience members were seated facing the panel, surrounded by Ana's photographs hanging on the gallery walls. Suddenly, in the middle of the discussion taking place, Ana's artwork began to loudly fall off the walls. Later, people theorized that all the heat in the room, from the lights and the people in attendance, somehow made the little plastic holders pop off, and the photos began crashing to the ground almost simultaneously. Ana quickly joined some gallery members as they gathered up her work and quietly tried to put it all back together and rehang them as the discussion ended and the audience filed out. Now, Carl's thing was hosting large dinners at his favorite restaurants and often picking up the tab, loving lively debates over good food. He invited the gallery women and Ana to join a group of attendees at a sushi restaurant next door when they were done putting Ana's work back right, and they did, with Carl standing and welcoming Ana to the table when she arrived at the restaurant. It was the start of a love affair that no one saw coming. A young, tiny, spontaneous, fiery Cuban woman who was a jogger and a vegetarian Barbarian, and a balding, bearded, middle-aged, set-in-his-ways artist who preferred to wear a uniform of blue overalls out of an insecure need to camouflage his stocky figure. But start it did, and laid the groundwork, leading to Anna's tragic end. And despite all Anna worked for, and all the career plans she laid, would lead Anna and Carl's names to be linked together forever after, for better or for worse. Before we get to the events leading up to September 8th and beyond, let's first find out a little more about who Carl and Anna actually were. Let's start with Carl. Carl Andre was born September 16, 1935, to his father, George Hans Andre, a Swedish immigrant, and mother, Margaret Johnson, in Quincy, Massachusetts. He was the youngest of 3 children, having 2 older sisters, Carol and Joan. Of his childhood, he remembers being given much freedom to roam, playing games in the tidal flats with the neighborhood kids. He got a love for poetry from his father, who would read classic poetry to his children out loud after dinner. Carl was awarded a full scholarship to Phillips Academy in Andover, one of the best prep schools in the country, where he majored in art. He then joined the Army and served in North Carolina in 1955 and 1956. In the late 1950s, Carl lived in New York and shared a studio with a former Phillips Academy classmate, the well-known abstract artist Frank Stella. In fact, Frank is credited with giving Carl the push he needed to pioneer the minimalist movement. As the story goes, one day in Frank's studio, Carl was working on a project of cut wooden sculptures. Carl had cut into one side of a long wooden timber. When Stella saw the uncut side, he remarked to Carl, "That's sculpture too." This seemed to open up an entire world of thinking about sculpture for Carl, one he would pursue pretty much from that day forward. The story of how Stella encouraged Carl in the birth of minimalism achieved near legendary status. But like everything, it seems, the story told is not exactly how it happened. According to Calvin Tompkins' New Yorker article, The Materialist, Andre once said about the famous story, quote, "I thought he meant that the uncarved back was sculpture too, but once I was telling the story, and Frank started laughing, and I said, 'Frank, is the story not true?' And he said, 'Yes, but what I meant was that you had to carve on that side too. So my whole career is based on a misunderstanding,' end quote. Artists have to eat and pay rent, so for a little while, Carl had to work at a regular job so he could make ends meet. From 1960 to 1964, he worked as a railroad conductor and freight brakeman for the Pennsylvania Railroad to support himself and his first wife, Barbara Brown. And this day job also really influenced who he would become as an artist. He really embraced the so-called blue-collar nature of the work, and even later adopted his customary blue shirt and blue overalls from this time period. He divorced his first wife and then remarried in 1963 to a woman named Rosemarie Castoro, and he quit his railroad job in 1964. Throughout the late 50s and early 60s, Carl did work on art and did a lot of poetry and writing, but it wasn't until 1965 that he had his first public exhibition of his artwork, a show called Shape and Structure. He had had an epiphany while canoeing on a New Hampshire lake, where he realized he wanted to create sculpture as place. His interest lay in creating sculpture low to the ground, rather than the traditional method of putting sculpture up on pedestals. From there, Carl's star rose, and this quiet man was credited with starting an art movement based on his preference for linear and grid sculptures, created low to the ground. His work was based on, quote, his decision to redefine sculpture as a horizontal immersive experience, unquote, according to Barbara Rose in the article, The Nature of Carl Andre. He worked primarily in metal, bricks, and wood. He continued to show his work in the late 60s, and in 1970 had a solo exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum. This was also the year he divorced Rosemarie. Although they remained good friends, a very polarizing figure in many ways, both personality-wise and through his work, Carl was told by the Guggenheim's director, Thomas Messer, that because of the show, quote, his work would now receive the ridicule it deserved, unquote. Ultimately, it received more praise than ridicule, to Messer's dismay, I'm sure. One of Carl's most well-known works was a series of brick sculptures, known as The Bricks, or 120 Fire Bricks, or equivalent. Each of the 8 sculptures in the series was made up of 120 bricks, and were the same height, mass, and volume, but different shapes. For some reason, one of these unassuming piles of bricks, equivalent 8, stirred up a bit of controversy after it was purchased by and shown at the Tate Gallery in London. In 1974 and 75, when the work was displayed, it didn't get too much of a response. However, in 1976, when the display was actually put away, the press criticized it for being a waste of taxpayers' money, basically saying the gallery had been duped into buying a pile of bricks. And some bricks were even defaced with blue dye by a local chef. Other people thought the Tate should have bought the whole series, which would have at least provided some context to the one sculpture. The funny part is, because of the controversy, the bricks has become one of the best-known works in the Tate's collection of modern art. Well played, Mr. Andre. Throughout the 1970s, Carl Andre was cemented as an important figure in modern art and became a fixture on the art scene in New York City and around the world. He continued to participate in art shows, have his work included in art books, was featured on art panels, helped out fellow artists, and was often referred to as the founder of the minimalism movement. His persona as a rather intense and quiet, stocky, overall bearded man who always carried a bag of books with him and liked to be involved in lively discussions was pretty well known, and he had a lot of friends and supporters, especially in the New York City area. However, there was a different, more cheeky side to Carl that wasn't as well publicized. In the mid-60s, he took to writing poetry, satirical and comic novels, and even mock pop song lyrics. He was also a known ladies' man, despite his insecurity with his rather rotund figure. Women who he dated or married would say he made it a point to win them over with romantic gestures and love notes, and most of the time, it worked like a charm. He dated gallery assistant Angela Westwater starting in 1971, and they broke up around 7 years later. But also, like most of his wives and or girlfriends, they remained friendly for years. By the time 1979 rolled around, Carl Andre was well regarded on the art scene in both New York City and abroad. People who liked him really liked him. They said he was generous, he was helpful, he was always ready to help out a struggling artist. And people who disliked him really disliked him, basically saying that he was a pompous, boorish, drunk asshole. Enter Ana Mendieta. Ana Maria Mendieta y Oti was born in Havana, Cuba on November 18, 1948, to her father, Ignacio Alberto Mendieta de Luzur, an attorney, and her mother, Raquel Oti de Rojas, a chemist and teacher. Her family on both sides were well-respected, well-connected, and wealthy. Her father's uncle Carlos was president of Cuba for 2 years in the 1930s. Her mother's grandfather, Carlos, a different Carlos, obviously, was a celebrated war hero during the war against Spain. As a baby, Ana was tiny and sickly, which led to her growing up pampered, catered to, and, well, spoiled. She and her sister, Raquel, grew up like princesses in a big house with servants in Havana. And then on holidays and school vacations, the girls would stay with their maternal grandparents at one of their 2 family estates in Matanzas. Young Ana was mischievous and a show-off, with a flair for the dramatic. She also had a famously terrible temper, something her family found almost cute, because it was funny to see someone so tiny throw such tantrums. In fact, her sister Raquel was known for provoking her when they were both little kids, just to see what kind of reaction she would get out of Ana. Ana attended El Apostolado del Sagrado Corazon, a Catholic school, where she excelled academically, although she was famous for never doing her homework, and was a bit of a class clown. It was an idyllic and privileged upbringing until it all came crashing down between 1958 and 1961, and all that had to do with none other than Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro had visited Ana's parents' house before he fled to Mexico because Mr. Mendieta was a supporter. Later, at Christmas time in 1958, the girls returned home from their grandparents' estate to find their father tearing apart the living room furniture, which had been stuffed with rifles and ammunition, to their horror. It came out that Ana's father had a large hand in helping Fidel, from refusing to practice rival Batista's laws to joining Fidel's 26th of July movement. Fidel rewarded Ignacio for being loyal to him, and the girls even defended Fidel publicly when it was said that he was a communist and the Antichrist. But then it came out that Fidel had joined the Communist Party, and this left Anna's father cold. He didn't support that communists were atheists, and he was very loyal to his faith. Therefore, he broke his support of Fidel. Eventually, Anna's father played a part in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the family, by then joined by a new baby boy, Anna and Raquel's brother Ignacio Jr., were fearful for their safety. At this point, the Mendietas were desperate to keep their children safe, and so they took a drastic step. They entrusted Raquel and Anna to Patria Potestad, or as it was more commonly known, Operation Peter Pan, an organization that flew Cuban children to America where they could live safely while waiting for Fidel Castro to meet his downfall. So on September 11th, 1961, Anna and Raquel tearfully bid their parents goodbye and boarded a plane full of 200 Cuban children headed for Miami. It was the last time they would see their mother and brother for 5 years, and the last time they would see their father for 18 years, as he would be in prison starting in 1965 when he was sent to political prison for being a major operative in a CIA spy ring. Before he was put in prison, Ignacio Sr. urged his wife to go to America after his arrest with their son to be with their daughters, and she did in 1966. And Anna and Raquel seemed to accept their mother back in their lives easily. Yet it seems Anna at least remained very angry at her father until his return from prison in 1979, when he arrived in Iowa to reunite with his family and live out his life as an American citizen until his death in 1983. Of course, all these hardships ahead were unknown to Anna and Raquel in 1961 when they reached Miami and deplaned, with Anna kneeling down with joy and kissing the pavement to the horror of her sister Raquel. And then, in her dramatic way, Anna said, "I'm free!" If only she knew what life in the Promised Land had in store for the Mendieta sisters. For the next several years, the girls were shuffled around, from a refugee camp in Florida to foster homes around Dubuque, Iowa, of all places. Despite promises of a good new life there by authorities and social workers, Anna and her sister were separated and forced to endure beatings from nuns and fellow students, sent from one bad home to another, lied to and called slurs, and forced to acclimate to a culture so different from their own, with no help and no allies. After a tumultuous adolescence for both girls, understandably, Anna seemed to be able to get her life in some sort of order for her to start college. Her mother and little brother were now in Iowa, and they and Raquel and Anna lived together while Anna attended the University of Iowa, which had one of the best art schools in the country. Anna had decided she could either be a criminal or an artist, and she chose art. During her time at school, however, Anna didn't do things the normal way. She was part of the school's experimental intermedia program, which combined art, performance, and the new medium of video recording, and was pursued by her married art professor, who was 13 years older than Anna, Hans Brader. His marriage ended in 1973, 2 years after he and Anna began their affair. And their relationship continued while Anna graduated, worked toward her master's degree, taught art at an elementary school, and changed her art style from a more traditional canvas art to something that would become her passion, body earthwork and performance art. According to Anna, quote, "My work evolved dialectically in response to diverse landscapes as an emotional, sexual, biological affirmation of being. My art comes out of rage and displacement. Although the image may not be a very rageful image, I think all art comes out of sublimated rage." Unquote. Anna's major themes in her artwork throughout her life revolved around her experience as a woman, her connection to her home country of Cuba, and her interest in creating powerful images and experiences through her art. One of her most compelling early works was based on her reaction to a fellow student at the University of Iowa who was sexually assaulted and murdered in 1973, which made a lasting impact on Anna. Sarah Ann Ottens was a 20-year-old student who was found dead in a community dorm room, number 429 Renow Hall, University of Iowa. In response, Anna created a series to, quote, "bring attention to the crime and all sexual violence," unquote. As part of this, Anna staged a fake scene where she invited fellow students and Hans, her instructor, to an apartment where they unknowingly walked into her performance as a sexual assault victim. She was tied up, half nude, and had splattered blood all around the apartment. The group of students understood it was a performance, but the overall effect was striking, especially since photographs of the scene were taken to document the performance. In addition to Anna's work honoring the female body and touching on themes of violence against women, Anna also seemed to have a strong connection with using blood in her artwork, and she created many pieces that made use of not human blood. She would find, cow's blood and stuff like that. This was tied closely to Santeria and her understanding of that practice from caretakers that she had had when she lived back in Cuba and when she went to visit Mexico. Anna and Hans spent several years living and working together, traveling to Oaxaca, Mexico, where Anna started then working with natural materials and creating female outlines in nature and photographing them. These became her pieces known as silhouettes, and I believe she created more than 200 silhouettes in the series. In 1977, Anna had set aside enough money to take her dream to the one place where it could come true on a grander scale than Iowa, New York City. Hans encouraged her, and even though she was worried about making their relationship a long-distance one, she boarded a Greyhound bus with a one-way ticket to the city, where she hoped she could become an established, respected artist, armed with a list of handy contacts that she had gathered through Hans. Her move to New York City did open up the art world to her, but it also led her to the man who would become her husband and her nemesis. After Carl and Anna met at that sushi restaurant in November of 1979, the relationship progressed, but it wasn't without many speed bumps. For starters, Anna was still pursuing her long-distance relationship with Hans until sometime in 1980, even though Carl was heavily courting her during this time. Flowers, notes, gifts, etc. Anna was extremely uncomfortable with the overlap and broke things off for good with Hans at the end of the summer. She was not ready to jump fully into a relationship with Carl because she had some misgivings, telling a friend he was, quote, cold and didn't react well to emotion. Carl also didn't let Anna keep her things at apartment 34E at the building on Mercer Street, despite the fact that she stayed there. Many people said at the beginning that he was also seeing 2, maybe 3 other women, although Anna felt strongly that she wanted him to be exclusive to her and she to him. In the meantime, being with Carl was also useful professionally for Anna. He was very well connected. Anna did her due diligence, contacting people, setting up meetings, calling galleries, etc. Don't misunderstand, she was her work's biggest champion, but being with Carl wasn't without benefits. Anna slowly began to gain traction professionally. A second solo AIR show, winning the Guggenheim in 1980, receiving grants, etc. And then in 1983, she was one of 30 fellows selected for the American Academy Prix de Rome in Rome, Italy. Anna was 35, and this was an important opportunity for her, but her life took a tumultuous turn right before she left for Italy in September of 1983. Her father died unexpectedly in August, and both her grandparents had died in Cuba not long before that. To top it off, she and Carl broke up right before Anna's father passed away, and she was infuriated that he didn't even call or contact her to offer his condolences. Sources say the year had been a rough one for their relationship, with the two becoming increasingly mean to each other over the course of the year. When Anna was selected for the Prix de Rome, instead of being supportive, Carl tried to talk her out of going, but she insisted and Carl walked out on her. Anna believed he was jealous because, suddenly, she was on the way up career-wise and Carl was on the way down. The two seemed to have some sort of hold on each other though, and Carl visited Anna in Rome around Christmas time, and it sparked a reconciliation, with Carl even suggesting they buy a house in Rome, an idea Anna loved. Unfortunately, the bubble burst fast. In the spring of 1984, a friend of Anna's visited her in Rome and let her know the rumor that was going around. Carl was having an affair in New York. Anna confronted him there in the fall of 1984, this time with her walking out and flying back to Rome. But then they reconciled again, and this time they decided to get married, shocking almost everyone who knew them. The pair were married on January 17, 1985, in Rome, Italy, and honeymooned in Egypt on a trip along the Nile River, an adventure that Carl found nothing but miserable, according to a journal found with Anna's things in her Rome residence after her death. Their brief married life, only 7 months passed between their wedding and Anna's death, was not a happy one, as Anna discovered yet another affair of Carl's, a woman in Berlin, Germany, who he seemed to be with while Anna was doing her residence in Rome. As the days passed from their wedding, it seems Anna began to believe it was a mistake, and she was secretly collecting evidence of his affairs with a plan to use what she had found in order to file for divorce. Anna was in fact in New York City in September of 1985, not to stay there for good with her husband, but to set herself up for her impending divorce plans. She had been collecting photocopies of evidence that Carl was seeing one, possibly more women, while they were reconciled and even married, with the woman in Berlin, Rita Sartorius, causing Anna the most anger and pain, since it became evident from her detective work that Carl would call both women back to back on the phone in the weeks leading up to Carl and Anna's marriage, and that Carl had spent time, alone time, with Anna and his other women within days of each other. Anna secretly planned to hire a divorce attorney and present her evidence of affairs without Carl having any inkling beforehand, as Anna told a close friend that he had a terrible temper and she feared retribution if he knew what she was up to. In the months before Anna's death, she seemed to be having some unsettling premonitions, telling a friend on a trip to Miami in the summer of 1985 that she believed she was, quote, going to die very soon. And then, in a conversation with an acquaintance of Carl's, Alice Weiner, over a lunch date around the same time as her Miami trip, Anna seemed to express that she felt the need to accomplish a lot before her time ran out. Anna told Alice, quote, I have a funny feeling. I don't know. I think it has something to do with heights. How could you live in that apartment? Alice asked her. I don't know. It gives me the creeps, Anna replied. In recent times, Anna's already established fear of heights seemed to ramp up, including a time when she was invited to climb the scaffolding of the Sistine Chapel, but when she got there and was even a few feet up the scaffolding, she panicked and couldn't do it. As September 1985 started, Anna was laying the groundwork for a new start for herself. She was planning on some new and bigger projects professionally and seemed ready to start divorce proceedings to end her toxic on-again, off-again relationship, now marriage, to her cheating husband. Sadly, Anna would never get her new start. And the question became, was her tragic death an accident or murder? And that is where I will end today's video. Part 1 of 2 videos on the death of Anna Mendieta. Next time in part 2, we will talk about the circumstances of Anna's death, the resulting trial of her husband Carl, and the aftermath. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you would please give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment, or even hit the subscribe button if you'd like to subscribe to my channel. Then you'll be notified when part 2 goes up next week. And if in the meantime you'd like to watch more videos like this one, there should be a playlist up on the screen that you can click on to watch more weird art videos. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you're looking forward to part 2. I am excited to bring it to you, and I will see you next time. Bye! And all that was caught on video. If I can talk. She had been collecting photocopies of stupid fly. I'm so pissed if it's not working. Was her work's biggest champion. Hey. Surrounded by honest photographs,